Okay, hi everyone. My name is Carolyn DePinho. I'm a senior. I'm on Unity Council and Walk, and I'm one of the co-presenters.
Hi, I'm Isabella. I'm also a senior. I'm in AAAG, and I'm also one of the presenters today.
Hi, my name is Ella. I am also a senior, and I'm the president of the Pre-Med Club, and I am also one of your lead presenters today.
So welcome everyone to the first webinar of the MD series. We're going to be hosting these webinars throughout the school year, so be sure to keep an eye out for the next webinar date. And we want to thank everyone who's coming, whether you're a prospective healthcare provider, a BIPOC who wants to learn how to advocate for themselves, or just someone who wants to learn more about this topic. Thank you so much for being here.
So to start off, we want to make a small disclaimer. We are not experts on this information, and this webinar consists only of our own research.
We're going to be talking about difficult and, for some of us, personal topics. With this being said, please feel free to take a step away from the computer. Always know that a recording will be sent out as soon as possible, so you will not miss out on the information. We will only be recording the information part of this webinar.
So to start off with some of the basics, what is discrimination? Medical discrimination is prejudice and discrimination in medicine and within medical and healthcare systems. It is based upon perceived race, gender, religion, and ethnicity. Medical discrimination can manifest itself in 4 different ways. 1, through conceptual ideas of identity. 2, discrimination that results in differential medical treatment. 3, the experience of identity that negatively impacts one's health. And 4, through institutional discrimination. For the purposes of our first webinar, we will be focusing on racism within the medical discrimination.
So how did medical discrimination start? Darwinism promoted the ideology of racism and perceiving Eurocentric features as superior and more advanced than any other race. Race is a social, not biological construct. The idea of race as a biological construct started with the founding of the United States to justify the dispossession of indigenous lands and later the continued enslavement of the Black population. For centuries, the medical field has continued to operate on the belief that race is a valid biological category, despite there being no scientific evidence to support these conclusions. For decades, BIPOC, especially Black people, were viewed as biologically inferior to white people, a belief that reverberates through the healthcare system in the United States to this day.
So we want to share a brief history of medical discrimination. As a disclaimer, we want to offer a comprehensive explanation for these cases, but especially for BIPOC, this can be especially difficult to hear. So please take time away from this forum if you need to. This forum is being recorded and will be available to you at any time.
So this starts in 1830, when Samuel George Morton wrote Cranion America, or a comparative view of the skulls of various Aboriginal nations of North and South America, in which he claimed that Native Americans and Black people had smaller skulls than white people, and thus smaller brains. Experts contended that this work provided the foundation of scientific racism. This later led to the comprehensive study in the 20th century to compare all skulls from different races, including European, African, Native American, Asian, and more, in favor of the larger, more intellectual European skulls. Overall, this study solidified the idea that BIPOCs were a separate set of species that were biologically, mentally, and morally inferior to white people. Therefore, they were considered appropriate subjects for experimentation.
The spirometer was invented in the 1840s by John Hutchinson. A spirometer is a tool used to measure lung function and help diagnose lung diseases. This machine was used globally. Thomas Jefferson's notes on the state of Virginia in 1832 wrote that Black people have inferior lung capacity than white people. Today, spirometer software has race correction built in, with 10 to 15% for Black people and 4 to 6% for Asian people. More studies have stated that white people have the best lung function of all races, without taking into account that more minorities tend to live in areas with higher population, which is directly linked to lung function. If a patient is Black or Asian, even if they have the same lung function as a white person, it will be harder for BIPOC to get a diagnosis for a lung disease because it is already assumed that the BIPOC naturally has worse lungs.
In 1913, sterilization laws were centered towards people with mental illnesses, but expanded to a list of different medical conditions and extreme circumstances that gave doctors leeway in choosing who to sterilize. These laws drastically affected BIPOC. For example, African Americans were 4 times more likely to be sterilized than their white counterparts. These American practices were extended to other groups, including African Americans, Native Americans, and more. American eugenics were later adopted by Nazi Germany and other European countries, targeting especially the Jewish population during the Holocaust.
In 1906, Professor Richard Strong of Harvard University intentionally inoculated 24 Filipino prisoners with cholera, contaminated with the plague. He did this without the consent of the patients and without informing them of what he was doing. All of the subjects became sick and 13 died. Despite his taking advantage of the Filipino population, Strong later became a noteworthy scientist in American tropical medicine. A general committee appointed by the Governor General of the Philippines recognized and condemned the shortcomings and urged reform, but no further steps were made.
The Tuskegee syphilis experiment, sponsored by the U.S. Public Health Service and led by John Charles Cutler, took place from 1932 to 1972. In the study, Black males were told they would be given free health care, but in reality, they were enrolled in a study looking at the natural course of untreated syphilis. During the study, information was withheld from the participants, and none of the infected were treated with penicillin, which by 1947 was a standard treatment for the disease. As a result, 28 of the 399 participants died of syphilis. 100 died of related complications. 40 had infected their spouses, and 19 children were born with congenital syphilis. The study went on for 40 years and only stopped when it leaked to the press.
In a 1946 to 1948 study in Guatemala, U.S. researchers infected prison inmates, insane asylum patients, and Guatemalan soldiers with syphilis and other STDs to test the effectiveness of penicillin. Approximately 700 people were infected as part of the study, including orphan children. The study was sponsored by the Public Health Service, the National Institutes of Health, the Pan American Health Sanitary, and the Guatemalan government. The team was led by John Charles Cutler, who participated in the Tuskegee syphilis experiments. Cutler chose to do the study in Guatemala because he would not have been permitted to do so in the United States. In 2010, when the research was revealed, the U.S. officially apologized to Guatemala for the studies. A lawsuit has been launched against Johns Hopkins University, Bristol Myers Squibb, and the Rockefeller Foundation for alleged involvement in the study.
So, how these events influence minority patient and physician relationships today? These historical examples are only the tip of the iceberg of how unethical medical practices were so common in our country for centuries. Inevitably, this has caused several connecting issues affecting the culture and nature of healthcare in the U.S. today.
So what are the results? First off, let's talk about the wage gap that pushes BIPOC into lower income communities with more barriers to healthcare. This is both a physical barrier in accessing healthcare, but also a monetary barrier as there are lower rates of job stability in lower income communities. These barriers completely close off the possibility for preventative care and continuous care. Secondly, we see chronic distrust for medical providers among BIPOC. For example, roughly 15% of Native Americans avoided seeking healthcare for themselves or a family member due to anticipated discrimination. And third, due to racial weathering, BIPOC as a whole face higher risk for chronic illnesses, but still receive inadequate care. When BIPOC access healthcare, their treatment is often unequal due to provider implicit bias.
But what is provider implicit bias? First off, implicit bias in general is any prejudice deep-seated within the brain that is then carried out against any minority group, especially racial minorities, minority gender orientations, and non-heterosexual sexualities. We may even be prejudiced against our own identifiers, although we tend to favor in-group, with positive stereotypes and disfavor outside groups. Provider implicit bias is focused into patient care that is influenced by implicit bias. This can look like a physician preferring English-speaking white cisgender patients over minority patients.
A few examples of provider implicit bias include the following statistics. Black patients are 50% less likely to receive pain medication than white patients. Black females are less likely to have breast cancer than white females, but 40% more likely to die from the disease. A Black woman is 22% more likely to die from heart disease than a white woman. A Black woman is 71% more likely to die from cervical cancer than her white counterpart. A Black women are 243% more likely to die from pregnancy or childbirth-related causes than a white female. Females, especially non-white females, are 30% more likely to be misdiagnosed with a stroke.
Additionally, Asian or Asian American patients are overdiagnosed with mood disorders, while Black patients are overdiagnosed with psychotic and manic disorders, especially schizophrenia. Also, invasive cardiovascular procedures are less likely to be performed on Black, Asian, and non-white Latinx patients compared to white patients. Third, less educated and less financially sound Black, Latinx, Native American, and Asian patients are less likely to receive an organ transplant. And in California, Florida, and New York, Latinx patients compared to white patients were less likely to undergo major procedures in 38% of 63 different disease categories.
Many physicians and people today still believe that race is something biological. Rather, it is the embodied effects of living as a BIPOC in a racist society that produces health inequalities. Race has no biological underpinning, but racism has biological effects. Many people think that race is biological or innate, but this idea is based off of faulty racial science that upheld European colonialism, chattel slavery, the dispossession of indigenous lands, and countless other acts of violence against BIPOC. All genetic evidence suggests that we're in fact one human species, but this is not the same thing as I don't see color. Race has been a powerful social category that shapes people's lives. Cultural heritage and ancestry also matter, and colorblindness will not erase the colonial history that created racism. Despite what we know about the genetic unity of the human species, many people, including doctors, continue to believe false ideas, like Black people feel less pain, and take health inequalities as evidence for genetic differences between races. But this misses the ways that systemic racism actually produces health inequalities, like chronic stress, hypertension, diabetes, and stroke, that all have intergenerational effects. Race is not biologically real, but it becomes embodied due to the effects of living in a racist society.
And when we talk about health, this is what we mean. This picture shows the social determinants of health, which show that health is multifaceted and influenced by economic stability, social context, environment, access to healthcare, and resources like education. We hope that this can provide insight as to how BIPOC can continuously and systematically be disadvantaged when it comes to health systems.
So what do we do now? Whether you're a prospective physician, a BIPOC learning to advocate for yourself, or someone who just wants to hear more about this topic, we ask that you always stay educated. Especially for prospective healthcare providers, you can actively vow to not fall down this path. You have to be actively anti-racist and combat your own implicit biases. You have to make active allyship a lifestyle and not just a reactive mindset. Medical practice has never been neutral because it's impossible to just trust the science. Science is an institution that has carried and normalized biases and discrimination from its founding. So support cultural competency programs within the healthcare system and education, and be involved in minority patient advocacy programs.
Specifically for BIPOC, we would like to share a few ways to advocate for yourself within a healthcare setting. First, keep educating yourself on medical discrimination. Second, engage in BIPOC-owned programs that specialize in minority patient care. Third, if you request testing or medication and a doctor says no, ask them to document refusal in the chart. Fourth, ask your healthcare provider if they are aware of discrimination in medicine and if they are actively anti-racist in their patient care. This is helpful to determine if you need to find a new provider. Fifth, and finally, if you feel that one of your healthcare providers is racist, file a formal complaint. Most healthcare organizations have patient relations departments that are equipped to address these types of concerns.
So next in the medical discrimination series, we're going to be talking about the discriminatory roots of women's health. So stay tuned for a date. And lastly, contact us for any questions or comments. If you didn't feel comfortable speaking up today, please just let us know. We're always here for feedback, or if you want to learn more about a certain topic, we would be happy to share anything with you. Thank you.